Hey everyone, Mr. Silva here, and this is for my Computer Applications in Business 2. This is our business unit, and this is Lesson 3, all about filling out the job application. So as a reminder for this unit, we're going through the steps of applying for a job and how you would go from creating your resume to applying for the job and then actually going through with the job interview. So we already talked about resumes. We've talked about finding a job that suits you based upon, things that you enjoy personally. And then this week we're going to talk about filling out the job application. So remember, we're going through the steps. So this is a sort of a step-by-step process. This may not be all the steps you take and in this order, but this in general is the usual format of how you would go. So after the resume and after the job seeking, so you've written your resume and you started finding that perfect job. You found a nice little list, or in some cases, maybe one or two of your perfect jobs that you want to apply for. Now what? Now you actually have to go and apply for the job, okay? It's not just going to be like, hey, I'm interested in the job, and they're going to give it to you. You actually have to apply for it. So how do you do that? That's the big question. And you do that through the job application. So the job application or application for employment, and it can be under many other titles, is where you fill out information about yourself in order to apply for the job. Job applications are typically on paper, but more often now they're becoming more common online. You'll find that over the next few years, especially as you guys get into high school, that you're going to find them online more than anything. It used to be that job applications, especially for like restaurants and stores, were done online. In some instances, like I know Walmart, I don't know if they still do it, Walmart would have the ability to apply in store, and that happens too. So sometimes you may go to a store or a place where you want to apply for a job, and then maybe like, oh, you can fill that out here. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Always do your homework. Make sure you look before you actually apply. This is where you need to sell yourself and tell them all about you, okay? Now, the resume already was trying to sell you as well. You're doing some more selling here, okay? It's going to be asking what are your qualifications, what are your skills, what is your personal information. The resume is the story of you, okay? The resume tells all of the information about you. The application is the facts, okay? The application is typically more detailed than the resume. The resume is just a very quick and brief 1 to 2 page document that has all of your information, your skills, your jobs that you've held, your education, and that's really about it. Your application goes more in depth and tells more about you. It gives the specific facts and specific details. So how do you get an application? If you typically find a post online, if you're doing some job searching online, great way to get started. We talked about this in the last lesson. When you're looking online, you'll typically find a link to their website to complete the application. If you're applying through a major company like Walmart or McDonald's or any other fast food restaurant, you'll typically find it on their main website, and it's typically towards the bottom, like apply for a job or job opportunities. Sometimes the application is completely online and you can complete it on your phone or computer. Now, I typically recommend that you complete it on a computer rather than on your phone because it's a little bit harder to type on your phone and you may be making more mistakes than you realize when you're typing on your phone. So I always suggest that you do it on the computer rather than actually on your phone. If not, you may have to obtain a paper application. Some companies still use paper applications, so it all depends. You just have to be very careful and make sure you research it beforehand. If that's the case, if you do have to fill out a paper application, you'll need to ask someone who works at the job site. Typically, this goes along the lines of, hello, I saw that you have a job posting for XYZ. Can I please have an application? Or even if there isn't a job posting and you're just want to fill a job application out, because it's also something you can do, especially if they might be looking in the future. You can say, "Hi, can I have a job application?" And typically they're going to give you one. Um, but sometimes they will say, "Oh, we're not currently looking." Um, and that happens. If they do say that, you have a choice. You can either say, "Oh, okay, thank you for your time," and you can walk away. Or you may say, "Oh, that's okay. I'll take one if you have one, just in case." Because you never know. It might go into a stack somewhere and may never be seen again, or it could possibly be looked at a later date. So it's kind of hit or miss, just to let you know. Okay. Um, you're gonna ask for a job application if it's paper, and you'll fill it out. Typically, what I suggest is if you are going to fill it out, um, you try and fill it out that day. If you have a paper application, try and fill it out that day and return it that day. Um, this would be a lot easier for you guys, especially as you get into high school, because the quicker you fill it out, the more that it gets back to the person, and the quicker you may be able to secure a job. The more time you wait and procrastinate and put it off, that job is going to slowly slip away. Okay, so make sure, if I were you, if you do have a paper application, you get it completed that day and return it that day. Make sure you're dressed nicely too. We're not asking you to be like suit and tie or very nice dress, but make sure you look presentable. And I'll tell you why at the end of this PowerPoint. But that goes to say, make sure you get it done as quick as possible. Don't wait on it. For online applications, you want to make sure you get the application done quickly, because you never know when those jobs might be going away, and who might snag that job before you. All right, so how do you fill out your application on paper? If you fill out your application on paper, make sure you first and foremost fill it out with pen. This is very important. Pen, of course, is more permanent and it looks better, but you also want to make sure you look black. Use black or blue pen only. Don't use any crazy colors. Um, it makes the application look more professional and makes it look like you actually spent some time on it. Okay, so make sure if you do have a paper application you fill out with pen, don't use pencil here. You want to make sure you take your time and write neatly. You don't want to rush through this, because you want to make sure that you take the appropriate amount of time to work on this and fill it out correctly and accurately. You also, if you're like me and write horribly, you want to make sure you take your time and write neatly. There's no rush on a job application, okay? I know I said that you want to fill it out quickly, but when you're filling it out, take your time, okay? It will look much better if you take your time on it. If you do make a mistake, the current suggestion is that you neatly cross out your mistake and write your initials above it, and then write what you need to write again. But if you make too many mistakes, I'm going to say like 3 or more, take that application, throw it away, and get a new one, okay? If you did write any confidential information on it, destroy it before you throw it away. Read carefully and make sure that you see what is being asked of you. Make sure you read each question carefully and that you think it through before you respond. Of course, some questions are going to come easier than others, but make sure you think about each question, and make sure you're responding to what's being asked. Fill in all of the blanks, for the most part. The reason why I say for the most part is, like in your job application for the employment section, if you've had no jobs, really you should only put NA once. You don't need to put NA in every single box. NA means not applicable. The reason why you do this is because you want to make sure it feels like your application is complete, and that you just didn't skip it. Okay, so writing NA says, hey, this doesn't apply to me. Remember, spelling and grammar do count. If you're not sure of a word, make sure you look it up. Even if you are sure of a word, make sure you look it up. Okay. Nothing more embarrassing than misspelling a word on your application. Okay, because people can be judgmental and think, oh, this person doesn't know how to spell. I don't think he's going to be working here. Okay. So make sure you really proofread it and make sure that you look up any words that you may have difficulty with. And remember to be truthful and honest. Okay, as I've said multiple times, everything and anything can be tracked back to you. Okay, so make sure that you tell the truth and you're honest in everything that you write on your application, because you never know when someone might look at that information and come back and check on it. Filling out an application online. It's a lot easier than filling it out on paper. And a lot of companies and organizations are moving towards this because it does a lot of the hard work for them. Typically, with a paper application, they have to look through it, they have to read it, they have to sort through it, and pick out key information. Whereas an online application, usually the computer or software will do all of the processing for them. They can even verify some of the information for them, and they can actually score the application and say, hey, might be a potential hire. Okay, so I like online applications a lot better because they're more quick and efficient. However, not everyone uses an online application because it does take time and it does take money. Okay, it's even easier. Most of the time, the website can even fill out parts for you. That's a nice feature. Not all of the time, though. Sometimes you do have to do a lot of typing, especially if you've had lots of jobs. But most of the time, it can, fill out the parts for you. Don't get comfortable, though. Just because it's easier doesn't mean that you want to get comfortable and think that you can slack off. You still want to read each question carefully, and you want to make sure you're spelling everything correctly and using appropriate grammar. Again, remember to be truthful and honest here as well, okay? You still need the same rules apply here. Even if it's easier in your typing, the rules still apply. So now we're going to move into the section about filling out the application. This is going to go, I chunked it out for you. This is going to go piece by piece of what is expected. And it was what is in each section. Okay, most of the sections will be similar for almost every job application. However, there may be differences. Just as a heads up. Your information. This is typically the first section, and it's always going to be about you. Okay, this is probably the easiest section to fill out. You need to provide your your full name, usually first, middle initial, or middle name. Depends. And last. You do want to give the correct information. If you do have a middle name, it's suggested that you do put it, just because that's easier to identify you. Be careful, as they sometimes will ask for and last, first, middle order, just as a heads up. So make sure you read that application first. Your social security number. That's something that's asked of you as well. This is a unique number assigned to you. This is assigned by the United States government. It's used for many things as you get older. For this, in our practice, I will not ask you for your social security number, but when you start getting into high school, you're going to want to memorize it, because of the fact that it is going to come back to you, and you're going to need to use it frequently. As you become an adult, you'll be needing to use it for things like applying for jobs, clearly. You'll be needing it to file your taxes, especially if you have a job. If you go off to college, you'll be needing it to apply for colleges. If you want to get a credit card someday, you're going to need to have your social security number to get the credit card. This number is essentially an identifier for you, and it's a point of being able to trace things. This is a federally assigned number to you, and it's going to be very important that you memorize it and learn it. I remember fighting with my mother when I was starting to apply for jobs, that I didn't have my social security number memorized, and I didn't understand why I needed to memorize it. Take it from my advice as someone who learned an important lesson. Memorize your social security number, especially as you move into high school. Okay. Other things that it'll ask: your address. You want to make sure you put your address, because any important information, especially your tax returns, like your W-2s, those are statements of the amount of money you earned when you need to file your taxes. That'll get mailed to you at your address, so you want to make sure you put your address. You also need to put your phone number, or the best place to contact you at. Most of you have cell phones. If not, you're going to put your home phone number. You also need, and I put address on here twice. I don't know why I put it on there twice. But don't leave any section of this blank, okay? This is all important information. Some of it is very important and required information, especially to get in contact with you. So make sure you put all of that information on there so that they can get in contact with you, and especially, for taxes. All right, the position you're applying for. This is usually the second thing that's asked of you. Okay, now that we've gotten to know you, your basic information, what exactly are you looking for? You'll need to put in the job you're applying for. So, best advice, do not put any or open. This may make it seem like you're desperate for a job and you'll take anything. Employers don't want desperate. They want the best people and the best positions. If you do have a list of opportunities, see what you can prioritize and put. Sometimes it will be helpful to list, but oftentimes you may not have that option. So you want to put whatever you want first. So let's say you want to be a cashier, then you could put cashier, okay? But if you like, oh, I could be a cashier, or I could do stock, or like that's restocking items on shelves, or I could be the cart attendant that grabs all of the carts in the parking lot. You can list those if you really want to, but you should try and pick one, especially if you find a job application or a job posting online. Pick the one that was on the job posting, so that way you can actually apply for that specific job. Next one's going to ask you typically if you want full-time or part-time work. If you're a student, you're typically going to want part-time work because part-time work is 20 hours or less. Okay, if you think about it, you go to school for almost 8 hours a day. That's 40 hours a week. The rest could be, working at a job part-time, 20 hours. That would bring up your total to 60 hours a week. Remember, there's 24 hours in a day, and there's you sleep for almost about 8 hours, we hope, but you don't want to overload yourself with working, okay? So typically you're going to want to work part-time. Your schedule. This is another thing that they'll ask of you. Are you free days, mornings, afternoons, days, nights? If the employer is open overnight, nights may not be an option, like if it's a restaurant. Sometimes restaurants close after a certain hour, so you might not be able to do nights. Keep that in mind. Are there any times that you're not free? That's something that they ask too. Now, depending on the employer, you need to be open, okay? I remember one time I applied for a job at Lowe's. This was back after I'd graduated from college. I accidentally put on my application that I wasn't free for a certain hour on a certain day, and they actually asked me, I noticed you put this hour on here that you're not available during this time. And I was like, oh, I must have put that by mistake. I ended up getting the job, of course, but be careful because typically employers are looking for you to be extremely flexible and have very open hours. So make sure that you kind of keep that in mind. Now, obviously, if you're a student, they're going to be flexible with those hours, but just to keep that in mind. Now, your salary. This is always a fun question to answer, and it's a very tricky question and can sometimes be used as a trick question. Typically, you should put negotiable or the wage offered in the position, okay? If it's posted in the job description, then that's a safe bet to put, okay? If it's, a job that's minimum wage, like working at McDonald's or working at a supermarket where it's going to be minimum wage, then you can put the minimum wage rate, okay? But never put anything higher than what, would be offered, okay? You don't want to, make it sound like that you want this high salary, because if you're asking for a high salary and someone else is asking for a lower salary, they're probably going to put the person that wants the lower salary. Okay, so always put either negotiable or what you know is going to be the actual salary. Some other questions that may be asked, these typically don't fall into a specific section, but they might. Have you worked with us before? This includes other branches or locations. This is typically a no answer unless you actually have worked for the company either after you've left or for other reasons, okay? If you haven't worked with the company before, put no. Do you have any relatives or family that works with us? Quite simple. But yes, if you do, it can sometimes help you get a job because that allows them to be a reference. And kind of like say, hey, he's a good worker, so on and so forth. But not always, okay? And also it could be a conflict of interest. Like if you're working with someone that you're a family member with, you know, you'd be a little too comfortable around them, and that might be that you can't work with them on the same shift. And put no if you don't. This is usually more common, especially if you're applying to somewhere that you haven't worked before, or no one in your family has worked before. You know, it's more common to put no. The next one is criminal history, and this one's a biggie, okay? If you have been convicted of a crime, make sure you tell about it. One of the things that pretty much every single employer is going to do is do a background check on you. They're going to check and see if you are telling the truth and seeing if you actually been convicted of a crime and anything of that nature. So you want to make sure you are telling the absolute truth, okay? If you do end up being convicted of a crime, convicted of a crime means that you were sent before a judge and you were sentenced and given a sentence, either like a hefty fine or jail time. Usually for criminal history, it's going to ask for the big offenses, like did you actually serve jail time? It's usually not minor incidents like, say, hey, you had a disagreement with your neighbor and your neighbor took you to court over something minor. Usually you don't need to disclose that. You can to be on the safe side, but you typically don't need to disclose that. And minor traffic issues too, like if you got a speeding ticket, you usually don't have to tell about that. Now, you do have to tell about it if you have like a speeding issue that you get sent to court and you do, like, you know, get your license taken away or things of that nature. Especially if you have a job where you might be having to drive like a company car, that can actually make you lose a job. So keep those in mind, okay? This is a very tricky question to sometimes answer, but make sure you're truthful and honest about it if it does happen to you. Previous employment, okay? You'll almost always be asked to provide your employment history. If you don't have any, put NA in one of the boxes and skip this section, okay? You'll usually put NA for the, you know, the employer name or whatever position. Put NA in each of them and then skip to the next section. Typically on a job application that's paper-based, you will typically have 3 spaces because paper is smaller and can't expand. Sometimes it will have a note on there to attach more if necessary, and you definitely need to attach more if necessary, okay? In general, you want the employment history of the past 10 years. And I know that may seem like a lot, but they do really check that far back, okay? For you guys, you're not going to have 10 years of employment history, so you're going to put what you need to put. And in this section as well, when we say employment history, this can involve babysitting, this can involve volunteer work. It doesn't necessarily have to be you employed in a job, okay? You're going to start with your most current position and work to your oldest, okay? You always start from most recent to oldest, okay? And again, I said 10 years because after 10 years, when you get to that point in your life, you can you don't have to list those anymore because they're really not relevant anymore. Like my job at Lowe's, as I was talking to you about, I got that job in 2011. Next year, I won't really need to put it anymore. If I go work at another school, but that's just something to keep in mind. My first jobs when I worked in restaurants, I don't put those on anymore because those were back in 2007, 2008. I don't need to put those anymore because they don't apply anymore. Those were over 10 years ago. Okay. Also, sometimes in a job application, if it's not relevant to your job that you're applying for, you don't always need to put it. Like for my teaching job, since this is my fourth teaching job, I don't put that I worked in restaurants and that I worked at Lowe's. Should I? Maybe, but I don't necessarily put those because they're not relevant to the job I'm applying for. But in your case, you're going to put everything for now. Okay. Moving on. In this section, you'll typically need to provide the employer's name or the company, the dates of employment. It's okay to do month to year. You don't need to know the exact date. Sometimes you just forget. Put present or NA in the end date if you're still working there. That's if you're still working there, because sometimes you will apply for another job while you're employed at another job. The address of the location, your job title, what was your job title, like what was the name of your job, your wages. Sometimes they'll ask you from start to finish. Your wages are how much you got paid. Sometimes they'll ask for your starting salary, and sometimes they'll ask for your finishing salary, what you ended with. Your duties, you want to give a short list. Typically, you're not going to write a paragraph here. You want to give a very brief list of what you did. Your supervisor information, in case they need to contact them. They will sometimes. And your reason for leaving. Your reason for leaving is a big thing, okay? Next to your criminal history, this and the salary desired, this is also a biggie. This is one of the more tricky questions on a job application. You need to be honest, but not too honest here. And you want to frame it positively, even if your boss was an absolute nightmare, okay? Some things that you can put. The job was seasonal. This is true. If you only worked there temporarily, say it was a summer job, that's a good reason for your job to end. It was only for the summer, okay? Job was seasonal. You left to take another job. If you got a better job, that's a good reason to leave your current job or the job that you were at. You left to take a job at XYZ. Perfect. You got a better job. School conflict. This isn't a good one for you guys, especially as you get into that. If your job is being unreasonable and your grades might be starting to slip, it might be time to rethink your job, okay? Typically, you want to see if you can rework it so that, you get better hours, or work with your boss to see if they can be more flexible, maybe reducing your hours. But if that doesn't work, it may be time to call your job quits, especially if it's impacting your schoolwork. Your schoolwork is always going to come first, okay? You're still a student first, and you still need to focus on your schoolwork. So if it does end up that you need to quit your job because your grades are slipping and you're concerned about that, your reason for leaving can be conflict of interest with school, okay, or school conflict. They may ask you about these, okay? When you're in an interview, they may ask you about why you left. So be prepared to answer. Never, ever, 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 ever put that you hated your boss, you hated the job, or anything of the like, okay? I do not care that if it was the worst job on the face of this earth and you had the worst boss on the face of the planet. If you put that, you may not be hired, okay? You need to be honest. So if you have a conflict of interest, use one of those options, and that's fine, okay? And you may even be asked why you're leaving your current job. So be prepared for an answer with that. You might say, oh, this job gives me more opportunities, or this job would allow me to advance further, or the common one, the one that I typically use is this job would appeal more to my goals. Okay, if you have goals of what you want to do, you definitely want a job that aligns to those goals. Okay. Now the last one is tricky, and I had to look this one up. What to do if you're terminated or fired? Okay, because that could be a red flag. Some employers are going to look at it and say, nope, he was fired, moving on to the next one. Some may actually give you a chance, especially if it's an older one. Okay. If you're fired, you should put terminated and leave it at that. You can also put laid off if your job was, canceled or you were laid off. Be prepared to explain positively, of course. Okay. If you were terminated, explain why you were terminated. This will come up usually during the job interview. Okay. Sometimes it's as simple as, I was terminated because of the fact the job was ending. Perfect. Okay. Other times, if it was you did something wrong, own up to it. It may not get you the job, but it's better to be honest than to lie about it and find out later, because you could always put that you were terminated, lie about it in an interview, and they could call that place. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next is your education history. If your job requires certain educational requirements, like a teaching job, it requires you to have a bachelor's degree. You'll need to list those, okay? You'll need to list your schooling, and you're typically going to go from current to past, or you might have a specific section, like there might be a high school section, there might be a college section, there might be a trade school section. So you want to make sure you read over those and put all of the appropriate information in the correct spots. Be honest here, especially like if you do get a job after college, because they might ask for your college transcripts. You typically need to list your school name and address, the name of your school, the type of degree or program. High school is a diploma once you graduate from high school, and you can also include any special programs. I always included college preparatory because my program that I did in high school was to prepare me for college. I took advanced courses, and so it was getting me ready for college. You also need to put dates of attendance. Typically, it's month and year, and then you also put your graduation. Now, if you're expecting, then you can put it. Especially if you're in college and you're going to graduate, you can put when you're going to graduate college. Even high school would work here too. Special skills. Not every application has this, but if it does, feel free to list them. If you do have any special skills or special certificates that you've earned, especially like technology certificates, make sure you list them. Okay, they could be a good selling point for you. This is more important if you don't have a job just yet. Okay, because you want to, if you do have any special skills and you don't have a job yet, this is a good way to show that you're interested in some things and have some skills that may benefit the company. Make sure you only list skills that are relevant to the job that you're applying for. Okay. This is pretty self-explanatory. You don't want to put anything that's not relevant to the job that you're applying for. References. This is typically the last section or second to last section. References. Your application only tells a piece of your story. The other piece of that story comes from people to back up your information. References are people who can speak about you. You always want to ask people if they would be able to be a reference for you, okay? There's nothing more embarrassing than having them put on the spot, having an employer call them and say, hey, I have so-and-so applying for a job. Can you tell me about them? You may think you get along with the person, and then they might have some serious issues with you, okay? And you may not know about it. So you always want to make sure you ask the person for a reference first before you actually list them as a reference, okay? As a student, typically your first references are going to be us, teachers. We typically will almost always help you out in finding a job. And, we're always more than willing to speak for you. If you have a good reputation with a teacher that, you really like this teacher, or the teacher really likes you get along well, don't be afraid to ask them, especially when you get to high school. Hey, I'm applying for a job. Would you please be a reference for me? 9 times out of 10 will say yes, absolutely. Okay. Friends of the family is a good one to also include. If they're people that your family knows that can speak on behalf of you, include them. They're good people to ask. Other people you volunteer to work for, okay? And as you get older and start having more jobs, you're going to find people who you worked for at those jobs that are going to be good references for you, okay? So don't be afraid to ask them, especially coworkers. Bosses sometimes are limited on if they can actually give you a reference, so keep that in mind. Do not put family members. This is very important. Your family members love you. They're always going to say positive and great things about you, okay? Don't put family members because they're always going to sell you and, they're always going to make you sound greater than you may actually be, okay? And plus, some applications will say, please do not put any relatives or close family members, okay? You have to make sure you read that too. On your application, you'll also be asked to provide their contact information. Sometimes this could be phone numbers. So if you're asking a teacher, you might want to see if they'd be willing to, give you their phone number. Got to be careful with that though, because they may not always be willing to do so. Or they may ask you to give you their, or you could always put the school phone number. That's where I was going with that. But just make sure you work with the teacher if you do ask a teacher to give them that information. If it's other people you've worked for or volunteered for, you can give that information as well. Usually like the phone number of employment. Make sure it's current. Also, they may ask for email, especially with job applications online. More and more, they're starting to have email applications and email references where they'll send out an email to that person and they'll be invited to fill out that information. So, and I know this is going on a very long recording, and we're almost done, but this last part is probably one of the most important parts of your application, and that's finishing it up. After you've done everything, you're going to make sure you read everything over, make sure everything's correct, everything's truthful. The last part of the application typically will always go like this. Please read and sign below. And then you have a statement. I certify that the information contained in this application is true and complete to the best of my knowledge. I understand that any false information could result in immediate termination. I have read and understand this agreement. It may not be word for word like that, but it is warning you that you will be checked out. You will probably have a background check. And if it's any information that's false, it could either not get you the job because you lied, or two, if they do find out after you've been hired, you could lose the job and be terminated, okay? So please make sure everything you write on your application is truthful and correct, okay? And you also need to sign it. Yes, sign it in cursive, okay? This is a big issue nowadays because we really don't teach cursive anymore, so you're going to want to learn cursive and learn how to sign your name, okay? And then you'll date it. If you're doing it online, you don't need to sign it. You'll sign it electronically. But if you're doing it in paper, please sign it. All right, when you're done. Online, this is easy. Online, you'll get a notification that your application was submitted, and you'll typically have to wait for a phone call. Okay? Not much after that. Paper, you should always try and ask for a manager nicely, of course. When you have your paper application in hand and you return back to that place, go up to the person who's working the front desk or whoever's at the front and say, can I speak to a manager? And you want to make sure that you give the application to a manager, not an employee, okay? There's a few reasons behind this. One, if it goes straight to a manager, it will most likely be looked at quicker. Typically, when you hand it to a manager, they're going to put it in the pile to review. Whereas if you give it to an employee, sometimes it may not get into that pile until later, or they might completely forget about it. Especially like if you're applying to a restaurant and you go during a busy period, which by the way, if you apply to a restaurant, don't ask for a job employment during the dinner rush because you probably won't get the job. I know from experience because some of the waitresses that I used to work under were not very nice and would take that application and put it right in the trash. Kid you not. So always ask to give it to a manager, okay? Because the manager will take care of it right away. If you are lucky too, and that job site really, really needs someone right away, they may interview you on the spot. That's why I asked whenever you turn in your job application. That's why I said you should dress nicely, because you never know. Especially if it's like at a restaurant, they may actually need someone, quick. So they may interview you on the spot because they may ask you, "Oh, do you have time for an interview?" Always say yes. Okay. I mean, you may not be in the best of time wise. So if you have a really good reason, yes, give that to them. But if you don't have a good reason and you're actually available, say yes. Okay. So please make sure that you take that seriously. And, because if they give you an interview right there and there on the spot, consider yourself lucky because they think that you might be able to be hired, and it might go well and you might get a job that day. Okay. Happens rarely, but it has happened to me. Okay. So keep that in mind. But for both methods, you need to be patient. It may take a while to hear back, and in some instances, you may not hear back at all. If it's been after a month, you're probably not going to get a job there. Okay. That's why it's important too that if you do go that route and you do apply for jobs, you apply for multiple jobs. All right. In summary, make sure you're careful when you're applying for jobs. Make sure you read over everything and answer the questions truthfully and be honest. Okay. I know I said that in the resume. It's true on the application as well. It's an experience, and you're definitely going to fill out several applications over your lifetime. You're very lucky if you get one application and it's the only application you have to fill out. But 9 times out of 10, when you're first starting to look for a job, you're going to fill out a bunch of applications. All right, that's going to do it for this lesson. I apologize that it's long, but there's a lot of good information in here.